Made of earth and water, one inside the other, a huge spherical experiment. Their palaces and city walls were covered with mysterious precious metals like gold, silver, and orichalcum. They were so skilled in engineering that they dug a huge canal 300 feet wide from the sea to the main center of the city, through which the world's largest ships could reach the palace directly. This was the great civilization and powerful empire that we know as Atlantis. They were also unbeatable in military power. A huge landmass of Europe and Africa once trembled under the power of their powerful navy. But when they were at the peak of this extreme power and unlimited luxury, suddenly one day, in just 24 hours, this entire empire was buried underwater. One of the greatest civilizations in the world was lost forever in a day and a night. What was life like there? What kind of food did they eat? How did they create this incredibly beautiful world by breaking through the ocean? And what...
The year was 1967. The place was the southern coast of Europe. That is, the coast of Greece today. The sun was shining on the blue water of the Mediterranean Sea. Dr. Nicholas Fleming, a young British oceanographer, was diving near the coast of Laconia, Greece. The sea water was as clear as glass, and the sun's rays were peeking through the depths. He was not looking for gold there, but diving 10 to 12 feet down to understand the secrets of nature. There was silence all around under the water. Only the sound of his own breathing and the sound of water waves could be heard. While swimming, he suddenly noticed a strange thing on the seafloor. There were some lines visible between the sand and algae. Dr. Fleming stopped there and thought that these straight lines could not be natural, because nature never creates straight lines. The hairs on his body stood on end as he brushed away the 1,000-year-old dust.
He went further and found another wall, then another. As he looked, a whole map emerged in front of him in the murky water of the sea. There were roads down there. There were structures of bite. There were large courtyards and tombs made of stone that had been sleeping under the water for thousands of years. It was as if the sea had been guarding this city for thousands of years. Fleming could not believe what he had seen with his own eyes. This mysterious city was named Pavlopetri. This was no ordinary discovery. It was the oldest submerged city in the world, about 5,000 years old. That is, at the time when the Indus Valley civilization of India was at its peak. Later, when this city was investigated in detail, the scientists were amazed. This city was not a backward village. It was a highly developed and planned city. There were 2-story houses. There was a complex drainage system, or poinsettia system, which proves that even...
It was not flooded. Rather, a terrible earthquake shook the land, and in an instant that entire part of the land went under the sea. The people of the city were probably sleeping or busy with their work. In the blink of an eye, their entire existence was submerged in water. This discovery of Pavlopetri reawakened an old and much bigger mystery. It was the Atlantis Mystery. In a book written 2,400 years ago, the great philosopher Plato mentioned just such an incident. He spoke of such a city, Atlantis Civilization, which was 1,000 times bigger than Pavlopetri, a city that was full of gold.
And he also claimed that in one terrible day and night, the city disappeared into the depths of the sea. After funding Pavlopetri, many experts now feel that Plato's words were not just imagination. If this 5,000-year-old place can be found, then surely Atlantis is also somewhere under the sea, and waiting for us to find it. But what was Atlantis really like? What were the people there like? And how did they live in golden houses thousands of years ago? To get to the root of this mystery, we have to go back about 2,400 years.
The time was 360 BC. The place was the city of Athens in ancient Greece. This was the time when great people like Socrates and Aristotle were teaching the world how to think. One of them was Plato. Plato was not an ordinary storyteller or novelist. He is called the father of Western philosophy. His words were considered to be eternal truth in that era. Plato is considered the greatest teacher of Western world thought. In the last days of his life, he wrote 2 special books, Timaeus and Critias. It was in the pages of this book that the name of a world came to the fore for the first time, which surprised everyone. That name was Atlantis. But Plato clearly said that this was not a fabricated story. According to him, his ancestor Solon had brought this information from Egypt. The priests of Egypt told Solon that you Greeks are still new. We have a much older history than you. And from here, the story of Atlantis comes to the world. But what did Plato actually say about Atlantis? According to him, it was no small place. He wrote that it was located beyond the Pillars of Hercules. And if we look at the map, this is the place we call Gibraltar, that narrow strait that connects the Mediterranean Sea with the Atlantic Ocean. That is, according to Plato, if you go out from Europe into the Atlantic Ocean, you will find this huge continent. That is, it was a whole continent. But the most surprising thing was its time. Plato said that Atlantis existed 9,000 years before his time. If we calculate from today, this time is about 11,500 years ago. If that is true, then imagine what the world was like at that time. It was the last time of the Ice Age. According to history, at that time, people only knew how to hunt stones and lived in caves. At that time, agriculture had not even started properly. This is where the biggest question arises. On the one hand, history tells us that at that time people lived in caves. They used stone tools and lived by accepting. But Plato claims that the people of Atlantis lived in royal cities during that era, built buildings made of gold, and had advanced technology. Due to this dispute, today's researchers think that there may have been a mistake in the timing. Maybe the date changed as the story travelled from Egypt to Greece. Many scholars think that Plato was actually talking about an advanced maritime civilization that was thousands of years before his time. And this is where a name comes to mind: Minoan Civilization. It was a powerful maritime world that developed on the island of Crete near Greece. According to Plato, the palaces built in Atlantis were not ordinary buildings. They were very large and stood in the middle of the sea. The question is, how did they build such huge palaces when there was no cement, no iron machines? Where did they get the technology to handle both water and soil? But the map of Atlantis that Plato described is considered impossible by today's engineers. Today we have cranes, bulldozers, and satellites. But how was this city designed thousands of years ago, when people had not even learned to wear clothes properly?
The biggest feature of this city was its layout.
Just think about its security. This city was like an impregnable fortress that no army in the world could defeat. Historians believe that this ring or circle of Atlantis was not magic. Rather, it was the real structure of Thera, the main island of the Minoan Civilization. Today's Santorini Island is in the shape of a crescent, but geologists have confirmed that before the volcanic eruption, this island was completely round or circular. There was a huge pool of water in the middle, and a circular earthen enclosure around it, just as Plato described. Now, the question may come to mind, if there was a circular enclosure of water around the city, how could people get from one place to another? This is where the craftsmen of Atlantis showed their intelligence in a way that seemed like magic at that time. Plato wrote that they dug a huge canal from the sea to the very center of the city. This was not a small drain. This canal was 300 feet wide and 100 feet deep. This meant that even the largest ships in the world could sail straight from the sea to the center of the city, the palace. And to connect these circles of water, they built huge bridges. Plato's description is so detailed that he said that there was a tunnel under this bridge,
so that boats could pass, and people and chariots could travel on the upper roads. Plato also wrote that the people of Atlantis quarried stone from the ground below the city, and this stone was naturally of 3 colors: red, black, and white. Imagine that scene of a huge wall made of red, black, and white stone patterns, and standing in the blue water of the sea. It looked like a painting. Not only that, Plato said that the outermost wall of the city was plated with copper. The inner wall was plated with tin. When the sunlight fell on this metal wall, the entire city would glow like a lamp or lamp. To sailors coming from afar, this city seemed like a divine light. When we talk about ancient cities, we can see the pearl and oyster trade in Harappa or the Indus Valley Civilization. But if you stepped inside through the huge gates of Atlantis, your eyes would be dazzled, because Atlantis was not a city of stone, it was a city of metal. Plato wrote that Atlantis had such immense wealth that no king had ever had before. The greatest speciality of this city was a mysterious metal, which Plato called orichalcum.
Today, we know gold, silver, and copper. But what was this orichalcum? According to Plato, it was the most valuable thing in the world after gold at that time. This metal was found underground on the island of Atlantis. Imagine the scene of the main wall of the city that surrounded the palace. It was completely covered with this orichalcum metal. When the sun shone on it, it did not look yellow like gold, but bright red like fire. It seemed like the whole city was a burning torch. Modern scientists think that it was probably an alloy of copper, zinc, and gold. The method of making it is now extinct. Now we go to the center of the city, where their most sacred place was, where the temple of Poseidon, the god of the sea, was located. The description of this temple given by Plato is beyond human imagination. It was so huge that hundreds of people could live in it together. The outer walls of the temple were covered with silver sheets, and the pinnacles were made of pure gold. But the scene inside the temple was even more strange. Plato wrote that the roof of the temple was not wooden. It was made of hand teeth, and on those white hand teeth were inlaid gold, silver, and orichalcum. Right in the middle of the temple was a huge golden statue of Poseidon. This statue was so large that its head touched the roof of the temple.
It showed the god riding a chariot,
which was being pulled by 6 winged horses. This was not just religion, it was a show of power. It was a way to show the world that Atlantis had no shortage of resources. Plato wrote a very strange and special thing, which separates this story from fiction. He wrote that there were a lot of elephants living on the island of Atlantis. This is a big clue, because elephants are not found everywhere. Plato's mention indicates that maybe Atlantis had contact with places like Africa or India, or this continent was somewhere where elephants were found at that time. Not only elephants, but also the soil and water there were miraculous. The people of Mohenjo-Daro were very rich and had great baths, but nature itself was kind in Atlantis. The plate writes that there were 2 types of springs coming out of the ground. One was boiling hot water, and the other was ice cold. This water was delivered to the entire city through pipes. There were separate baths for the kings and separate for the common people. Imagine that at that time, when birds were drawing water from the world's rivers with buckets, Atlantis had something like a centralized plumbing and geyser system. This was the height of luxury at that time. The port there was always crowded, and the ships of the world were coming and going. Just as ships sail in our Mongla seaport, the coast of Atlantis was the world trade center of that time. Historians have confirmed that the Minoan Civilization was the world's first thalassocracy, that is, the empire of the sea. Archaeologists have found pottery and art made by the Minoans in the pyramids of Egypt and Mesopotamia. This proves that Plato's claim was correct. At that time, there was indeed a civilization whose trade spread all over the world. They were self-sufficient in resources. They had their own wood, stone, and abundant food. Here, too, the similarity to the Minoan civilization is perfect. Their land was very fertile. There were tall trees to build ships, and there were plenty of grains and olives. But who were the people behind those golden walls? When Plato's detailed description and the evidence of the Minoan civilization are taken together, a picture of a modern world emerges before us. The society of Atlantis was very orderly. The people here were mainly divided into 3 groups: craftsmen and farmers who kept the economy running, warriors who lived in special parts of the city, and the ruling class, who were considered direct descendants of the gods. The fertile soil there yielded crops twice a year. Plato spoke of a strange fruit with a hard shell, and from which drink and oil were obtained. Researchers think that Plato may have been talking about coconuts, which suggests that the climate of Atlantis was hot and tropical. The people there were fans of perfumes and flowers, because in some places pictures of perfume bottles and saffron collection have been found. The most important thing is that the position of women there was very advanced. In ancient Greece or Rome, women were kept indoors.
But in the Minoan or Atlantis civilization, the scene was the opposite. The wall paintings there say that women were independent. They wore beautiful and colourful clothes. They did not just manage the house. They were priestesses, participated in sports with men, and made big decisions in society. Like the Harappan mother statue, the worship of the female deity was at the top there. But behind this colourful society, there was a dark truth. A religious ritual was celebrated in the streets of Atlantis that directly corresponds to the Harappan and Minoan civilizations. It was the Sa. We find Sa on the Harappan seals, but in Atlantis, Sa was the god of power. The sacred Sa roamed the open spaces around the temple of Poseidon.
Plato says that once every 5 or 6 years, on a dark night, the rulers of Atlantis gathered in the temple. The rules were very strict. You could not use any iron weapon, sword or spear to catch Tsar. Only kicks and ropes were in hand. The goal was to capture one of the most powerful Tsaras alive and unharmed. This was not just a hunt. This was a test of valor. The slightest mistake meant death. When they had risked their lives to subdue Sara, she would be brought inside the temple. There was a shining pillar of orichalcum metal engraved with the laws of Atlantis.
The bull was sacrificed on that pillar. It sounds like a horror film, but the evidence of this remains in stone. Today, we find images of bull leaping, or jumping on the bull, on the island of Crete. There, young men and women are seen unarmed, holding the bull's horns and jumping over it. The similarity between Plato's story and this painting cannot be a coincidence. According to Plato, Atlantis did not have democracy. It was a huge federation, or continental union. The entire continent was divided into 10 separate kingdoms, and 10 kings ruled. The most powerful of them was Atlas, the eldest son of Poseidon. The city was named Atlantis after him, and the sea was named the Atlantic Ocean. Plato wrote that for several generations, the kings followed the law and walked on the path of truth. They considered gold to be just a metal, not the purpose of life. But as time passed, a greedy change began to take place. Plato said the divine blood in the veins of the kings gradually mixed with the blood of the people, and human flaws or pride took root in them. They thought, when we have the best navy and weapons, why should we be limited to one island? We want the whole world. This is where the golden opportunity of Atlantis ended, and the destruction began. They became an imperial power. The Atlantean armies began to attack the coasts of Europe. They devastated North Africa. They moved on to enslave Egypt and Greece. Their society was now filled with corruption, luxury, and cruelty. Plato wrote that Zeus, the king of the gods, saw all this from above and decided to punish Atlantis. But here it is important to understand one thing. Plato did not really mean that a god descended from the sky and drowned the city. That was his way of saying it. In fact, Plato wanted to convey that when a civilization becomes blinded by its power and challenges the laws of nature, its downfall is inevitable. Earthquakes, floods, or sea storms are nature's response. Plato's story was actually a warning to future generations. Today, when we are cutting down forests and drying up rivers in the name of development, the story of Atlantis seems even more relevant. Plato wrote that when all avenues of reform were exhausted, Zeus called a council of the gods and decreed the fate of Atlantis. It was not magic. It was the brute force of nature. Suddenly, the earth began to tremble. The volcanoes spewed out so much ash and fire that the sky turned black. And then came the great flood of the sea. A huge tsunami, as high as 100 feet. That huge wave crushed the strong walls of the city like a toy. Those who were sleeping on golden beds did not even get a chance to open their eyes. Now the biggest question comes before us. Was the city that sank really Atlantis? Or did Plato name it Atlantis after the destroyer of the Minoan Civilization? If we put aside emotions and look at science, we can see that in 1600 BC, a terrible volcanic eruption took place on the island of Santorini, which is called the Eruption.
This explosion was so powerful that the map of the entire island changed. The land sank into the sea. This disaster broke the backbone of the Minoan Civilization. The ports turned to ashes. The ships were swept away like straw. The cities on the coast were submerged in water. These mills are so missing that it cannot be called a coincidence. Most modern historians have now concluded that Atlantis was none other than the lost Minoan civilization.
But why did Plato change the name and call it 9,000 years old? The answer lies not in history, but in Plato's philosophy. Plato was not a historian. He was a philosopher. When Plato was in Athens, the society there was also becoming like Atlantis. Greed and corruption were increasing. He presented the destruction of the Minoan civilization as a story to warn the people of his country. 70% of our world is water, and we have seen only 5% of the depth of the ocean so far. New technology shows us many things hidden in the darkness of the ocean that were a mystery until now. This story of Atlantis does not end here. The blue sea still holds thousands of untold secrets in its chest. Every year new discoveries are being made, which challenge the history books. What do you think? Did Plato call this Minoan civilization Atlantis or something else? Be sure to share your opinion in the comments.